It is absolutely crucial to remember that this family has suffered an unimaginable tragedy and endured sheer, absolute torment. Detectives seized their digital devices, thoroughly searched their vehicles and residences, and conducted incredibly exhaustive interviews with everyone involved. These people lost a loved one. And while police work naturally follows a systematic evolution, we must acknowledge their pain. Every inquiry needs a solid foundation to build upon, so it only makes sense to begin examining the established facts first. The undisputed fact is that a family member brought Nancy back to her residence at that specific hour, which became our primary focal point. We grilled them on their whereabouts, observations, and actions, putting them through an agonizing ordeal that justifiably left them completely devastated. As the head of this department, I am perfectly capable of absorbing the public backlash and weathering whatever criticism gets thrown my way. Armchair detectives and political commentators love to formulate theories about this tragedy, despite possessing absolutely zero firsthand knowledge of the situation. These internet sleuths have never actually worked a homicide, which is fine, but I absolutely draw the line at one specific behavior. Law enforcement officers are sworn to shield innocent families from further trauma, and I will vigorously defend the defenseless without hesitation. Therefore, I absolutely will not tolerate any more malicious gossip directed at the grieving relatives of this tragic crime. Nancy's final confirmed interaction was not with an unknown assailant, but rather with the individual who wed her oldest child. The final individual to witness the elderly woman safely inside her residence was someone who had shared family meals with her for almost 20 years. This relative possessed intimate knowledge of her daily habits, her personal schedule, and the complete floor plan of her property. He was completely aware of her security system, blind spots, and surveillance equipment before dropping her off, ensuring she was secured inside and departing. A mere 4 hours passed before she vanished without a trace, a terrifying reality that serves as the opening scene for most media coverage. True crime specials obsess over the disguised intruder with the knapsack, alongside the chilling cardiac device failure at 2:28 in the morning, which holds significant weight. While those details are incredibly crucial, national news outlets have repeatedly overlooked a deeply troubling undercurrent surrounding this entire investigation. This overlooked dimension actually originated long before the front porch surveillance footage mysteriously cut out at 1:47 in the morning. We might be looking at a sinister foundation that was carefully and silently laid within the family dynamic over several years. Consider the terrifying possibility that the true threat to this elderly widow resided a mere 4 miles down the road rather than materializing from the shadows. The individual in question is Tommaso Tioni, a 50-year-old immigrant from Italy who has taught science in Tucson, Arizona since 2006. On paper, he appears to be a cultured and level-headed professional whose online profiles mention a love for reptiles, playing the electric bass, and cooking traditional meals. Almost 20 years ago, he tied the knot with the victim's oldest female child, Nancy Guthrie. The married couple shares a single male child and resides roughly 4 miles away from the victim's upscale neighborhood in the Catalina foothills. Throughout the majority of the past 20 years, this son-in-law remained a constant and prominent figure in the widow's social circle. He occupied a central role within her inner circle, functioning as her most geographically accessible relative on a day-to-day basis. Because he was married to her firstborn child, their short driving distance naturally positioned them as her most frequent local visitors. Whenever the elderly woman required transportation but felt uncomfortable behind the wheel, she would either hail a rideshare service or reach out to her relatives. Holiday gatherings and routine weekend meals were frequently hosted at the residence belonging to her daughter and son-in-law. During the evening of January 31st, 2026, the widow utilized a ride share to attend a family meal, arriving at 5:32 before vanishing forever. After enjoying a quiet evening alongside her loved ones, her daughter's husband escorted her back to her house at 9:48 that night. He escorted her to the entryway, waited until the garage fully shut at 9:50 that evening, and departed. Which brings us to a crucial profile of the victim. Grasping the true nature of this terrifying mystery requires a deep understanding of the widow's unique personality and lifestyle. The 84-year-old victim suffered from significant physical frailty, restricting her movement and forcing her to depend heavily on a strict prescription regimen. Sheriff Chris Nanos explicitly mentioned during a press conference that she lacked the stamina to traverse even 50 yards without some form of physical support. Despite technically qualifying as a medically fragile senior due to her cardiac implant, her cognitive abilities remained incredibly sharp and observant. She exhibited absolutely zero signs of mental decline or memory loss that a perpetrator might exploit to justify bizarre bank transfers or erratic behavior. For over 50 years, she maintained an entirely independent lifestyle at her gorgeous property nestled deep within the Catalina foothills. Following her husband's tragic death during a 1988 Mexican excavation trip, she expertly handled all of her own personal and legal matters. Throughout the past 35 years, this resilient widow maintained absolute control over every single aspect of her existence. She flawlessly orchestrated her banking, real estate, and daily routines while dedicating massive amounts of her free time to a deeply rooted religious congregation. Everyone who truly cared about her agreed that she was an incredibly decisive person who always relied heavily on her own gut feelings. Nobody ever had to hold her hand or run her life for her. Because of this, any individual trying to sneak in and actively pull the strings behind the scenes, grabbing hold of her money or daily business, would have caught her attention immediately. She spent 35 years managing her own property completely independently without leaning on anyone. She clearly understood her baseline reality. Any strange deviations would have set off massive alarm bells in her head. Should she have spotted that manipulation and chosen to confront the exact wrong individual about what they were secretly doing behind her back, speaking up might easily turn into the deadliest possible mistake for a senior citizen in her specific shoes. This entire analysis is built squarely around that terrifying reality. We are absolutely not talking about a disoriented, submissive victim who is completely blind to her surroundings. We are looking at a brilliant, self-reliant, and highly guarded individual who, during her twilight years, likely stumbled right into a hazardous trap that criminal profilers consider nearly invisible to onlookers and almost impossible to break free from once trapped. Our focus will now shift to 5 separate evidentiary clues. A single one of these points is enough to raise massive red flags. When combined, they paint a deeply disturbing picture that detectives, psychological profilers, and financial auditors know all too well. Let us dive in. Taking monetary advantage of seniors remains a massive yet heavily concealed criminal epidemic across the country. Research from aging advocacy groups suggests that this monetary manipulation drains billions of dollars from older generations annually. Surprisingly, the vast majority of these thieves are never random intruders off the street. The guilty parties are usually blood relatives, grown kids, sons-in-law, or daughters-in-law. These are family members who invested decades building a solid bond, only to subtly weaponize that exact loyalty to dominate their target. This vicious cycle repeats so predictably that monetary fraud investigators and senior protection advocates can map out the entire playbook blindly. Professionals witness this tragedy unfold hundreds of times, and the timeline never really changes at all. Stealing is never step one. Grasping this concept is absolutely vital to the investigation. The initial phase is all about gaining entry. A relative will usually slide into a supportive role first. Giving the senior a quick ride to the local teller is a classic opening move. Mailing off a random utility check becomes common. Tagging along to meetings with the accountant suddenly turns into a regular habit. What starts out as a friendly escort eventually morphs into them steering the conversation entirely and constantly demanding answers. They figure out exactly which banks hold the funds and how much cash sits inside. Meanwhile, the aging victim just feels incredibly thankful for the extra hand. In a society where senior isolation has quietly grown into a devastating crisis of its own, seeing a relative actually drop by, pay attention, and act invested in your health easily translates as deep affection, exactly as it should. Using genuine emotion as a weapon is exactly why this scam operates so flawlessly. The victim grows dependent on the company, and gradually, without any obvious shift, innocent favors mutate into a completely different beast. Casual chats eventually shift toward banking passwords and securing medical proxy rights. Inquiries regarding the inheritance are disguised as logical preparation and deep affection, making absolutely sure everything stays perfectly organized when death finally arrives. Then come the sudden property inquiries, constant digging into retirement checks, and probing into who takes over the estate once the owner passes away and cannot oversee things. A professional fraud investigator who dedicates their entire career to these scams breaks down the timeline like this. Securing a foothold is always phase one. The cash grab never happens right away. Getting comfortable with the books is prioritized. The abuser ensures the senior cannot run their daily budget without them. This manufactured reliance simply looks like profound compassion to clueless bystanders. Whenever the target finally connects the dots, assuming they ever figure it out, the trap has already been permanently sprung. Bank vaults are wide open. Legal documents have permanent signatures on them. The calculated separation from watchful friends and neighbors is in full swing. Let us overlay that exact predatory blueprint onto Tommaso Cian and his relationship with Nancy Guthrie. This guy was no random cousin showing up for turkey dinners. He was a permanent fixture. His residence sat just 4 miles down the road. His spouse was Nancy's nearest child, meaning their household represented the most accessible relatives. He chauffeured Nancy to holiday gatherings constantly. Popping into her living room was a completely normal routine. Thanks to his marriage to Annie, he essentially functioned as a gatekeeper for any major choices impacting Nancy's world. Think about the harsh reality of that dynamic for a second. Whenever a monetary call had to be finalized, an invoice required settling, or a ledger demanded balancing, whenever documents required a signature, Coney usually stood right there in the room as the most available relative. His presence was not inherently evil at first. It was pure convenience, driven by a mere 4-mile commute while Savannah lived all the way up in New York. Cameron was totally out of state as well. Physical closeness is literally the foundational requirement for exploiting an aging victim. Fortunately for him, Cian possessed endless amounts of access. Nancy owned significant wealth. She held the deed to a house she occupied for 5 decades. She collected a steady cash flow. Her monetary freedom was absolute. Ever since she lost her husband Charles back in 1988, she crushed 35 years of handling her own budget without anybody else pulling the levers. She spent years quietly and carefully managing her own affairs to establish that fierce autonomy. Giving up the reins to her money was not something she took lightly, making this detail incredibly crucial. When examining cases of seniors being exploited for their money, the ones fighting back the hardest, those who remain quick-witted, fiercely self-reliant, and guarded about their freedom, rarely scare off a perpetrator. Ironically, these traits make them a bigger prize, since self-reliance usually points to larger assets, while their pushback simply acts as a catalyst for things to spiral out of control. Think about the specific moment investigators continually flag as the catalyst in these exploitation scenarios. That precise instant when subtle manipulation crosses the line into a truly hazardous situation. Typically, it boils down to just 2 potential scenarios. The victim either puts their foot down and says no, or they warn the abuser that they plan to expose the secret to an outsider, and Nancy Guthrie was sharp as a tack. She kept a close eye on her bank accounts and raised 3 kids, including a famous morning show host who speaks to millions of viewers every single day. That daughter possessed serious ties within journalism and the police force, giving her plenty of money and drive to fiercely protect her mom from any danger. Suppose Nancy figured out a trusted insider was scheming to steal her wealth, and she chose to share those fears with Savannah. How would the subsequent days and weeks have unfolded? This is not just a theoretical inquiry. Within the context of senior exploitation, it marks the clear line separating a situation swept under the rug from an emergency that forces detectives to step in. No one is claiming that this sequence of events definitively took place. The real inquiry is if this behavioral template matches the proven details regarding Cian's role, his level of clearance, and the mysterious events leading up to Nancy vanishing. Ultimately, the pieces lock together so perfectly that it warrants a deep and ongoing investigation. However, gaining and keeping monetary power over an aging widow does not happen in a vacuum. A secondary factor must exist, one that facilitates the initial scheme while masking the ongoing threat from anyone looking in from the periphery. The perpetrator absolutely must cut the victim off from the rest of the world. Consider the people who would instantly realize if you were acting out of character. For the average viewer, that group spans a huge web of buddies and colleagues. Folks living next door would spot your empty driveway and try to contact you if you suddenly fell off the radar. These are everyday acquaintances, completely separate from your relatives who would naturally start poking around if your personality or habits suddenly shifted. Try picturing that same support web for an 84-year-old lady residing solo out in the Arizona climate. Nancy absolutely had an extended social group, though it was relatively small. Her congregation, a few tight-knit companions, and the folks living near her in the foothills for decades all cared about her deeply. Yet, their grasp on her daily life primarily came from updates shared by relatives, especially since her kids lived far away in different states. With Savannah living on the East Coast and Cameron situated outside the local area, her broader friend group lacked a front row seat to her actual daily routine. Their entire understanding of her well-being relied entirely on secondhand updates or her own occasional reports. Whether it involves money or physical harm, the next phase of senior exploitation practically mirrors itself every single time. Total segregation is what behavioral analysts label as the calculated method of severing a target's ties to the outside world. It never occurs overnight, and you can rarely pinpoint one specific incident that flipped the entire situation upside down. Instead, it unfolds as a creeping restriction where the senior citizen gradually hangs out with fewer companions. Distant relatives start getting fewer updates about her true condition, allowing the perpetrator to completely control the narrative. They become the ultimate gatekeeper, standing between the victim and any observant loved ones who might sense trouble brewing. Most dangerously, the targeted senior rarely notices this deliberate shrinking of their world, since every canceled plan feels perfectly logical at the time. Skipping a midday meal, rushing a chat on the phone, or making up a convenient excuse to turn away a visiting neighbor all seem completely innocent. Standing alone, these moments look totally harmless. The sinister blueprint only reveals itself once you look back at the grand total of those misconnections. Leading up to the time Nancy vanished, how frequently did non-relatives actually lay eyes on her? Which outsiders truly grasped the reality of her routine? And more crucially, who was left completely in the dark? With Savannah hosting a major morning broadcast in Manhattan and her brother Cameron living far away from the desert town, their mom was often alone. Annie remained the closest relative geographically, making her the most consistent fixture in Nancy's everyday world. Yet Tommaso Cian was the one running the property, taking her out to eat, chauffeuring her around, and deeply weaving himself into her daily habit. Determining his moral character misses the mark entirely, because the real issue lies in the actual setup of the situation. Ultimately, we have to ask who held the keys to the communication pipeline surrounding this vulnerable woman, relying on their sheer closeness and authority to dictate exactly which details reached Savannah and Cameron regarding the genuine day-to-day reality of their mom's routine. They essentially held the ultimate power to screen everything for the rest of the relatives, so let us carefully examine the actual video from the front porch. Right around 1:47 before dawn on February 1st, 2026. The front entrance lens over at Nancy Guthrie's residence suddenly lost its feed. Whoever marched up to that house under the cover of night showed absolutely zero signs of second-guessing themselves. There was no cautious pacing around the yard to analyze the floor plan, nor did they closely inspect the doorway for hidden recording devices just in case. Instead, they strolled straight toward the one piece of tech requiring their immediate attention, the security lens, and promptly disabled the whole thing. Ex-Federal Bureau operative Brianna Fox reviewed the clip, noting that the figure practically casually strolls onto the porch as if he owned the place. He acted neither sneaky nor worried about getting busted, and Fox intentionally highlighted this obvious indifference toward the possibility of facing any legal consequences. Such an overwhelming sense of invincibility usually stems from a single distinct advantage, which is possessing intimate knowledge of the property. You just do not see that kind of confidence from some random trespasser who merely cruised by an address they pulled off an internet search. Over roughly 20 years, Cian had stepped foot indoors countless times, totally familiarizing himself with both the surveillance angles and every single access doorway. Having memorized the entire floor plan, Detectives are currently struggling to figure out if he utilized this intel personally during the kidnapping or passed it along to accomplices. Yet the most chilling piece of information regarding this entire scenario is right here. Assuming a perpetrator systematically manipulated Nancy into losing touch with folks who could have spotted the warning signs surrounding her situation and provided this isolation tactic dragged on steadily until the 31st of January, leaving a massive gap in time before anybody dropped by to check up on her, then the exact setup for that tragic evening was far from a mere coincidence. These perfect circumstances were likely engineered on purpose throughout a lengthy timeline stretching way before the actual kidnapping ever took place. Let us stop for a moment, because if you happen to be tuning in while thinking about an aging relative, whether a mother, father, or grandparent, or basically any loved one whose daily routine remains somewhat hidden from your view, please pass this recording along to those who desperately require this message. This specific chain of events we are breaking down currently plagues thousands of different households at this very second. Operating almost completely unseen and utterly quiet, distributing our broadcast might genuinely be your most crucial task today, especially since this goes way beyond just Nancy's personal tragedy. It serves as a massive red flag, especially considering that on February 4th, 2026, a mere 3 days post-disappearance, reporter Ashley Banfield shared exclusive podcast intel from a highly trusted police insider. The hidden informant revealed a massive bombshell to the host. Authorities had officially hauled off Annie Guthrie's personal automobile, securing it inside the police lot for forensic processing. Such a revelation completely shifted the general mood surrounding the probe, verifying exactly what countless true crime followers were already guessing. Cops were definitely zeroing in on the relatives, so we need to clearly separate the absolute facts from the rumors by outlining what we actually know for sure. Detectives physically confiscated the ride shared by both Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cian shortly after Nancy vanished without a trace. We also confidently know that even after 4 long weeks of digging into the mystery, their automobile remained locked up in police custody. Another undeniable truth emerged the moment journalists grilled the Pima County Sheriff's team specifically about where the ride was being held. The authorities fired back with a strict public relations response, verbatim stating that their only allowable comment was that the sedan remained crucial to the ongoing case. They never claimed the sedan passed inspection cleanly, nor did they suggest giving it back after finding absolutely zero suspicious materials inside. Remaining a vital piece of the puzzle means we truly have to acknowledge the opposing perspective, seeing as the defense is totally valid and warrants our attention. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos openly brushed off the impounding as routine protocol, while former Federal Bureau veteran Jennifer Coffindaffer, who previously served on tactical assault squads and currently reviews the files on television, presented a genuinely compelling point. The ex-agent pointed out how cops never bothered securing a judge's signature for the property sweeps at Annie and Cian's place, relying entirely on permission instead. Coffindaffer backed this up by explaining that if detectives truly possessed hard evidence tying the couple to the crime, depending on voluntary access would be incredibly foolish. Snagging a court order would be mandatory, with Coffindaffer firmly declaring that she would skip the polite requests entirely if her squad had legitimate grounds for a raid. Her logic holds serious weight in the detective world, especially since relying on goodwill sweeps heavily implies the task force lacked the smoking gun needed to slap cuffs on somebody right then. However, the seasoned expert dropped another massive theory that completely flips our understanding of why that particular automobile matters so much. The analyst floated the idea that deputies kept the car parked in lockup for reasons entirely unrelated to Annie or Cian physically snatching Nancy off the street, but rather due to a strong hunch that the perpetrators secretly monitored the elderly victim starting directly from the couple's driveway. Just let the sheer gravity of that hypothesis sink into your brain for a second. Imagine a shadowy figure staking out the residence late into the 31st of January, patiently watching the grandmother pull up and noting exactly which passenger door she opened before stealthily tailing her bumper all the way down the road until she finally parked back at her own address. Under those circumstances, the impounded sedan morphs into a crucial clue strictly because of the stalker's proximity, rather than any criminal actions committed by the relatives themselves, detectives might discover a monitoring device planted underneath the car, alongside smudged prints or genetic material left behind by whoever was keeping tabs on her. Should this hypothesis hold water, the actual offense did not kick off right at Nancy's porch at 1:47 in the morning. The nightmare started much earlier in a suburb 4 miles out, where an individual possessing insider details about Nancy's schedule waited patiently to trail her vehicle. Such meticulous tactical preparation is never just a random coincidence. This indicates the perpetrator possessed exact knowledge regarding Nancy's whereabouts that specific night. The culprit understood her schedule intimately, realizing she attended that meal, secured a ride back, and would spend the remainder of the evening completely isolated. Authorities are still treating the car as a crucial piece of the puzzle, a detail that remains incredibly significant considering the probe has dragged on for over 5 weeks without a suspect in custody. That detail points the way forward, drawing heavily upon the forensic discipline known as psychological profiling. The core concept here is quite simple, asserting that individuals react to extreme trauma following established psychological patterns, meaning authentic sorrow cannot be faked. True panic is never just an act. When a beloved family member gets snatched from their house during the darkest hours, the resulting reaction is primal, frantic, and entirely uncontrollable. Viewers witnessed Savannah Guthrie display exactly that kind of raw emotion live, watching a prominent network host walk right off the set of her life's most significant assignment. She abandoned the opening festivities for the Winter Games just so she could plead on camera for her mother to be brought back safely. Everyone listening could hear the utter devastation shattering her words. She spoke right to the captors without relying on scripted public relations notes, letting her unfiltered agony flow freely while also delivering a deeply personal message to her mom. She tenderly reminded Nancy of her immense inner strength, calling her a cherished child of the divine. Cameron also stepped up with his own heartfelt pleas, while Annie flanked her brother and sister in numerous clips, wearing their obvious panic and vulnerability for the world to see. These relatives were clearly not worrying about media spin or optics. We watched a household collapsing under the weight of tragedy, grasping at the few options left for those who are utterly powerless. They utilized their massive platforms, their loud cries for help, and their earnest begs aimed directly at the morality of the kidnappers tuning in. Such transparent agony perfectly illustrates what innocent victims experience when they have zero secrets and can only project their overwhelming fear into the universe. So where exactly did Tommaso Cion fit into this chaotic picture? It is a highly scrutinized inquiry yielding a very clear, factual outcome regarding his visible commentary. His track record of television interviews and formal press conferences has been practically non-existent. Furthermore, his public involvement with the grieving relatives during the months after the kidnapping has been virtually zero. A bizarre reality for a guy whose wife's mother was ripped from her residence. This was an 84-year-old lady whom he chauffeured back to her house on the very evening she vanished without a trace. He spent roughly 20 years preparing meals for her and celebrating festive seasons together, yet he remained hidden while her own child shattered emotionally on national broadcasts. Throughout this entire ordeal, his lack of vocal support has been deafening, a point that requires some serious reflection. Savannah relentlessly uploaded clips to her social media profile, utilizing her massive audience of 1.6 million fans to speak straight to the abductor. "We got your communication and we hear you loud and clear," she stated during one specific broadcast. Straining to keep her profound panic in check, she pleaded with the viewers to send her mom back so the family could rejoice together once more. Promising substantial financial compensation, she abandoned any polished journalist persona to handle the catastrophe organically. Those phrases poured out of a desperate child ready to declare literally whatever it takes. She would yield to any demand and make any vow just to ensure her mom's safe return, begging the question of the driver's whereabouts. Why was the man who married into the family 20 years ago completely missing, especially since he held the final verified conversation with her before tragedy struck? His absolute muteness throughout the ordeal is glaring, though merely staying quiet fails to prove criminality. Attorneys often instruct relatives to keep their mouths shut while detectives are actively working a case. Certain individuals simply digest horrific trauma behind closed doors, completely lacking the emotional bandwidth to face reporters. We must validate those incredibly fair and reasonable explanations for avoiding the press. Those psychological profilers never judge muteness within a vacuum. They look closely at the behavioral trends, framing that distinct lack of communication. Surrounding Tion's refusal to speak, a pile of verified evidence has built up, creating a scenario that detectives simply cannot overlook, especially regarding the events of Day 7. On February 7th, 2026, local authorities executed a property sweep at the residence belonging to Annie and Tioni. Officers showed up and lingered for roughly 2.5 hours with bright strobe lights shining through the glass as crime scene techs methodically documented the house. An ex-agent for the Central Intelligence Agency and the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been openly breaking down the facts of the incident. This expert spotted personnel lugging a white container filled with forensic gear, later verifying that an officer had a brown paper sack intended for securing clues. The homeowners voluntarily permitted the sweep, though the police department refuses to reveal if any useful items were actually seized. However, the reality that cops combed through the property of the final individual to spot Nancy breathing right on the 7th day of the probe serves as a concrete fact that profilers definitely weighed when judging Tion's subsequent attitude. Moreover, he kept entirely tight-lipped about the whole thing. Whenever authorities eventually discover a relative's involvement in abusing a senior citizen, either by committing the act themselves or by handing over key details to a hitman, criminal profilers frequently observe a very specific pattern afterward, which is termed calculated mourning. This manifests as feigned worry from a safe vantage point, offering just a bare minimum of visibility to dodge early scrutiny, showing their face occasionally, dropping a vague comment or two, attending relative get-togethers to later claim everything was perfectly fine, all while strictly monitoring the narrative so the police never glean any real clues. Calculated mourning offers enough cover to deflect blame, yet it completely fails to hide the glaring behavioral gap we see with Sion. His total lack of media presence, completely contradicting his in-laws' agonizing and televised heartbreak, is hardly mere speculation. Anybody tracking this investigation can easily see the glaring reality of the situation, regardless of whether it points to outright culpability, a lawyer's advice, a stoic personality, or another hidden motive we simply do not know yet. The police and the justice system will ultimately figure that out, but let me reiterate one absolutely undeniable point. An innocent guy who is terrified for his kidnapped, aging mother-in-law simply refuses to stay mute for weeks on end. He screams from the rooftops and attends every single media briefing. He begs the public for help and stands firmly right by his spouse's side during every interview, since absolutely nothing could stop a truly blameless, utterly panicked relative from doing everything humanly possible to bring her home. True innocence shines through clearly during a tragedy, and it always plays out right in the spotlight. Kone went a totally opposite route, leaving everyone wondering exactly why he did that. Assuming you are still watching this breakdown, which you probably are since our viewers never bail early, type out the phrase, "I am still here," down below, so we know you are ready for the most crucial detail of this entire case. We need to unpack the reality of that 41-minute time frame, seeing as the tactical execution of this kidnapping paints a picture of a carefully orchestrated hit rather than some random heat-of-the-moment break-in. The perpetrator absolutely needed inside intelligence to pull this off. Furthermore, the sheer scale of that insider information remains the biggest, most overlooked clue in the whole hunt. Right at 1:47 in the morning, the porch lens blacked out, and it definitely was not some lost wanderer tripping over a wire. The intruder marched directly toward that exact location with total intention, aiming to blind the single security device capable of catching their face, executing this move before attempting anything else. Taking out that lens was step number one, proving they knew it was there. But how do you magically guess the right angle of approach? How could a stranger pinpoint its exact placement or map out its blind spots so perfectly? The only way to disable it that cleanly is if you had personally hung around that yard during the daytime, maybe grabbing dinner on a regular weekday, secretly soaking up the layout while nobody else suspected a thing. Ex-federal investigator Brianna Fox reviewed the clip, noting the suspect strolled up the driveway as casually as a homeowner would. They showed zero panic or doubt at the property line, moving with the fluid grace of somebody who had walked that path 100 times already. We are not looking at an amateur scouting a random house under the cover of night. We are witnessing a professional carrying out a hit in familiar territory, right before Nancy's heart monitor dropped its wireless signal 41 minutes down the line. 41 minutes is a massive detail that desperately needs to be talked about way more. Detectives and burglary specialists agree that the most seasoned crews try to get in and out of a target house in under 10 minutes flat. The golden rule of breaking and entering is to limit your exposure on the inside at all costs. Lingering around drastically spikes your odds of bumping into someone, making a loud noise, or getting caught red-handed. Time is the ultimate enemy in these situations, which is why real pros strike like lightning and vanish even quicker. Yet the phantom wandering through Nancy Guthrie's living room clearly felt absolutely zero sense of urgency. They lingered for 41 minutes, stretching over 4 times the standard heist window inside the residence of an 84-year-old lady, showing total calmness. The suspect moved methodically and looked completely relaxed on camera, proving they were not sweating the clock at all. That arrogant swagger comes from knowing deep down in your bones that the cops are not on their way. Just imagine the kind of insider intel you would need to feel that secure at a crime scene. Whoever did this had to be absolutely certain that no late-night nurses or maids were scheduled to drop by or check in on her. It required complete confidence that relatives wouldn't randomly swing by the property that night looking for left-behind keys, worrying about her health, or pulling off a surprise visit. The perpetrator had to understand that alarm bells wouldn't ring until the next day, right when her congregation noticed she was missing from morning worship. They needed intimate familiarity with her day-to-day routine. That internal clock had to be mapped out perfectly to pinpoint the exact window between when she went to sleep and when society realized she was gone. Furthermore, executing a plan within those 41 minutes required a flawless understanding of her bodily limitations and medical reality. Since escaping or putting up a physical struggle was completely out of the question for her, and she lacked the ability to quickly dial out for a rescue, the attacker absolutely banked on those facts prior to even approaching the resident. You cannot just search these kinds of intimate facts online, nor can you learn them by parking a car across the street for a couple of hours. To possess such profound insight into an older woman's daily habits, medical weaknesses, and friendship circles takes serious inside access. Understanding the exact layout of her vulnerability only happens after spending countless seasons woven into the fabric of her life, sharing meals, giving her rides, and just lingering in the background. Those long periods of blending in allowed the suspect to gather crucial details right under everyone's noses without raising a single red flag. At this point in the narrative, we have to introduce another individual, and discussing him means we must tread with extreme caution and exactness, far beyond anything else we have covered so far regarding a man named Dominic Evans. This guy works as a grade school instructor out in Tucson while also holding down drumming and founding duties for a music group called Early Black. That happens to be the exact same musical outfit where Thomas Tioni slapped the bass for a long time. Jamming together since 2007. These guys built a deep friendship that goes back almost 20 years prior to the vanishing of Nancy Guthrie. The internet turned its blazing spotlight on him the moment federal agents dropped porch camera clips of a disguised person creeping around the property. Armchair detectives immediately started blasting out photo collages comparing his facial features, desperately trying to connect the dots to the intruder by pointing out matching body types, eye shapes, and supposedly identical ink on his arm. Documents that folks threw up on various platforms claim to originate from the local courts in Pima County, but legitimate press organizations never actually verified these rumored past offenses regarding breaking and entering or stealing. Let us be perfectly transparent here. Professional reporters have completely failed to authenticate any of those legal records. Mentioning them only serves to highlight the gossip surrounding the investigation rather than claiming they are absolute truth. What we do know for a stone-cold fact is that detectives brought him in for questioning roughly 7 days after the incident began. That sole conversation lasted roughly 40 minutes, focusing entirely on the music group, his personal ties to Kay, and his alibi for the overnight hours spanning January 31st to February 1st, though he later told the New York Times that cops never bothered to reach back out. Let us take a look at the exact words coming out of Sheriff Chris Nanos' mouth regarding this specific teacher. When the Times pressed him regarding the relentless cyberbullying raining down on the man's household from internet mobs convinced he was guilty, the top cop delivered a very telling statement, which we will repeat verbatim right now. He mentioned the guy was enduring an absolute nightmare, going so far as to suggest he lawyer up and drag those keyboard warriors to court for defamation. Keep in mind, the actual head of the local department guiding this entire manhunt basically told the man to file civil suits against his online haters. You do not talk like that about a prime suspect. Rather, it proves the police had already crossed his name off their active list. Bringing him up is definitely not an accusation, but it instead highlights a legally proven link between him and Sion. Furthermore, the intense internet obsession over their friendship has permanently etched itself into the public record of this tragedy. Watching how the press and the authorities navigated that whole mess alongside the web sleuths is fascinating, serving as a massive reality check on how actual police work completely clashes with the wild theories cooked up by amateur detectives. Figuring out the mastermind who supplied the blueprints for the break-in, tracking the security angles, along with the medical device details and routine timings, is still a total mystery. But this side tangent doesn't name the killer. Instead, it proves the true culprit remains completely off the public radar, keeping the detectives grinding away even 5 weeks after the fact. Taking a step back reveals a massive web of solid proof, psychological profiling, and scientific testing accumulated over the past month and a half, resulting in 5 distinct pillars of the investigation. If you spin it correctly and act stubborn enough, you could probably find a loophole to explain away any single clue. The reality is that these facts are tightly interwoven together, leading us straight into the first major red flag regarding money manipulation. Tommaso Tioni sat right in the sweet spot that fraud experts consistently flag as the #1 danger zone for stealing from seniors. We are looking at a relative who lived nearby and possessed constant, unrestricted entry into the victim's everyday routines and personal business. Nancy Guthrie still had all her faculties and lived entirely on her own terms, which guarantees she would have aggressively fought off anyone trying to take over her bank account. Whenever you look at verified instances of financial exploitation targeting seniors, pushback from a clear-minded older lady with influential relatives to lean on typically forces the situation to escalate. The perpetrator simply cannot risk getting caught. So the moment discovery turns into an actual threat, the entire dynamic shifts dramatically, which is a pattern the detectives working this file understand perfectly well. This brings us to exhibit number 2, the isolation tactic. Phase 2 of exploiting older adults for money inevitably involves deliberately cutting off their ties to the outside world. It happens through a gradual shrinking of the social circle that could potentially spot red flags, ask questions, or step in to help. Due to his specific role within the household dynamics, Cohn was perfectly positioned to control what people knew about Nancy. His proximity, familial tie, and everyday presence made him the ultimate gatekeeper of her life. Then there is the sheer tactical brilliance of the kidnapping itself, heavily relying on knowing exactly where the security lens is pointed, memorizing her daily routine, and utilizing a 41-minute gap of total confidence where that kind of undisturbed entry demonstrates a profound understanding of her habits, which you only get by intentionally studying someone's private world for an extended period. Now we arrive at the third major clue, which centers entirely on the automobile. Authorities impounded the car belonging to Annie and Tioni right after Nancy vanished, and they still have not given it back even after running tests for over a month. If you read the formal press release issued by the regional sheriff's office, stating that the automobile is still an active piece of the puzzle proves the police have definitely not ruled it out. Detectives might suspect the ride holds hidden GPS tracking data from a stalking phase, or perhaps forensic traces linking it to an outside accomplice who utilized it for a stakeout. Keeping it locked up in the lot for over 5 weeks paints a very specific picture of exactly where the cops are focusing their absolute heaviest scrutiny. This brings us to the fourth critical point, which is the deafening lack of communication. Any blameless individual dealing with the brutal kidnapping of his aging mother-in-law, who has to watch his spouse fall apart on nationwide broadcast news while relatives put up a $1 million reward, should be screaming from the rooftops rather than completely shutting down. You would expect them to stay front and center, shouting into every microphone they can find, simply because staying in the spotlight is the absolute best way to help. What Tioni actually did out in the open during those weeks after Nancy went missing is completely verifiable by anyone willing to look. The jarring difference between his absolute quiet and the agonizing, televised heartbreak of his extended family is not just an opinion. It is an undeniable reality. Moving to the fifth crucial element, we have to talk about the insider details and the sheer tactical genius of the break-in, like knowing exactly where to blind the security lens and spending 41 minutes inside, navigating her living room without rushing, and possessing absolute certainty regarding Nancy's daily schedule and overall physical limitations, which directly contradicts the typical frantic actions you would expect from a random burglar off the street, pulling off a job that smoothly demands a perpetrator who spent years closely observing everything Nancy did on a daily basis. Authorities have not released the identity of the informant to the press yet, but everyone is still wondering who held the deep background knowledge necessary to pull this off. We are looking at 5 separate paths of inquiry that all intersect at one specific household bond, relying on long-term proximity and an incredible level of blind faith. You might be able to explain away each point on its own, but combined, they form an unshakable profile that seasoned detectives know is never just a fluke. This creates the fundamental blueprint for a motive, especially when dealing with an offense executed with such extreme calculation, cold planning, and deeply personal touches, leading law enforcement to naturally assume the culprit is tightly embedded within the victim's inner circle. Let us be absolutely clear about the legal facts on the books right now, which confirm that Tamajan is not currently facing any formal indictments. The police department has completely refrained from labeling him as a primary target or even an individual they are officially watching. In fact, Sheriff Chris Nanos stood in front of the cameras to exonerate the relatives, boldly stating that internet rumors attacking them are both malicious and completely unfounded. Because the cops relied on permission rather than warrants to sweep the property, retired federal agents point out that the task force clearly lacked the concrete evidence needed for serious allegations. We fully acknowledge and respect the reality of those statements. Yet this manhunt has dragged on for over 5 weeks without a single cuff being slapped on anyone, 0 verified glimpses of her, and absolutely no proof she is still breathing. And with a primary automobile rotting in a police compound, the dark cloud hovering over Tioni refuses to blow over. Instead, the suspicions have only grown significantly darker. And asking the tough questions, backed by a massive mountain of verified paperwork and hard facts, while being radically open about the details, is definitely not meant to torture a grieving household. It serves as the absolute last piece of justice we can offer Nancy. An 84-year-old grandmother has vanished into thin air after dedicating over 50 years to establishing her roots out in the Tucson heat. She was incredibly devoted to her church family and single-handedly raised 3 children following the tragic early death of her spouse. She forged a fiercely self-reliant lifestyle against all odds simply because she valued her absolute freedom above everything else. Everyone who genuinely cared for her agrees that she was a completely one-of-a-kind soul, yet Nancy Guthrie remains completely unaccounted for today. Detectives have not locked anyone up. Investigators refuse to point fingers at a specific culprit, and we still lack any concrete sign that she survived the ordeal. Relatives have put up a $1 million reward for any clues that bring her back home safely. On top of that, the FBI is pitching in another $200,000. Yet the biggest mystery at the heart of this entire investigation, the focal point where all the clues ultimately intersect, the riddle that crime scene analysis, psychological profiling, and the exact sequence of events keep highlighting, is not about the identity of the person walking up to her porch at 1:47 in the morning, The real question is who actually sent them there. By the way, where are you tuning in from right now? Go ahead and drop your hometown, your state, or your nation down in the comments section. This mystery has captivated people across the globe, so we are eager to see just how far this community stretches as we track the story of NY. Let us know your exact location. Up next in our coverage, we are diving deep into the actual extortion letters. We will cover the $6 million crypto ultimatum, along with those two specific cutoffs that expired without a single dime being transferred, what handwriting experts and linguistic profilers have discovered about whoever drafted those messages, and what cyber specialists believe the complicated digital payment setup shows regarding their sophisticated preparation and precisely when they started plotting this crime. Honestly, that upcoming upload could be the most crucial piece of content we have ever put together regarding this situation. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on those alerts so you are notified the second it goes live. I also want to give a massive shout out to our loyal audience, especially those of you who have stuck around for every single installment of this journey. Whether you have been passing these clips around to your friends or dropping brilliant insights and genuine sleuthing questions down below, you are the reason this platform thrives, and your dedication is exactly why we push ourselves to deliver such top-tier reporting. For anyone wanting to dive even further into mysteries just like this one, or looking to get a sneak peek at our fresh deep dives, along with bonus theories that never air on the public feed, and a chance to actually help decide what we cover next, you should definitely check out our channel memberships. Come be a part of the inner circle that funds our research and ensures these critical missing persons reports remain front and center in the media. You can find the sign up link right down in the description box, and every single tier goes straight toward financing the very documentary style videos you are currently enjoying. Nancy Guthrie is owed the truth. Her loved ones absolutely need closure. And until we uncover those facts, we are refusing to let this tragedy fade into obscurity, and we will never stop fighting. I wanted to ask about your recent statement formally ruling out the victims' children and their partners as suspects. Could you share what specific evidence prompted that decision and exactly how early in the process they were eliminated? While I cannot provide the precise timeline of when we ruled them out, I want to state unequivocally that these individuals are completely innocent. Former federal agents reviewing the footage noted the suspect moved like someone who owned the property, showing complete indifference to getting caught. That level of confidence does not come from an internet search or a drive-by scouting trip. It comes from years of intimate access. Fraud investigators have documented this exact pattern hundreds of times. A nearby relative builds trust, gains financial access, then isolates the victim from outside observers. The perpetrator must know the victim's schedule, her physical limitations, her security blind spots, and exactly when no one else will check on her. Asterisk, asterisk. The lesson here is chilling. The most dangerous threat to a vulnerable senior is rarely a stranger. It is the trusted insider who holds the keys to their daily world. Asterisk, asterisk. Tioni was cleared by authorities on February 18th after DNA testing, cellular ping confirmation, and a voluntary 3-hour search of his residence. But his complete public silence while his wife's family shattered on national television remains a glaring behavioral anomaly that profilers cannot ignore. The family's car was impounded shortly after the disappearance and remained in police custody for over 5 weeks, still listed as crucial evidence. Investigators also searched the couple's home on day 7 of the probe, removing items in brown paper, evidence bags, and a white forensic container. 5 pillars of evidence converge on a single dynamic: proximity, financial access, isolation tactics, insider knowledge, and deafening public silence. If someone you love is an elderly person living alone, ask yourself, who controls the information flow surrounding their daily life and financial decisions? The next episode will cover the $6 million cryptocurrency ransom demand, the 2 expired deadlines, and what handwriting experts found. If you have any information about this case, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. The reward stands at over $1.2 million for Nancy's safe return. Subscribe now and turn on alerts so you do not miss the ransom letter breakdown the moment it goes live. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old, fiercely independent, and sharp enough to manage 50 years of finances entirely on her own. She raised 3 children alone after her husband died in 1988, and she never needed anyone to run her life for her. Yet on the night of the 31st of January, 2026, the last person to see her safely inside her home was her son-in-law, Tommaso Tioni. 4 hours later, a disguised intruder appeared on her porch camera and moved through her home for 41 uninterrupted minutes. The perpetrator walked straight to the security camera and disabled it first, with zero hesitation, as if they had done it 100 times before.